Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku joined the X-Men as the strongest mutant recruit. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Yonkers, New York, carried the familiar, damp chill of early spring, a stubborn cold that clung to the brickwork of Aldera Junior High and seeped through the worn fabric of Izuku Midoriya's jacket. Inside, the cacophony of the final bell was a starting pistol for a race he always lost. Hallways transformed into a churning river of bodies, loud with the relief of escaped prisoners, and Izuku was a piece of driftwood, pulled along by a current he couldn't fight, noticed by no one. He was 14 years old, a boy composed of nervous energy, an overactive mind, and a bone-deep yearning that had no outlet. His hair was an unruly mop of dark green, a forest of curls that perpetually shadowed his wide, expressive eyes. Freckles were scattered across his cheeks like constellations on a pale sky. In a world defined by the extraordinary, Izuku was painfully, crushingly ordinary. This was the age of the X-gene. Humanity had taken a sudden, chaotic leap forward in evolution. People could fly, teleport, read minds, or, in the case of the boy currently shoving past him, secrete a foul-smelling acidic mucus. The world was divided not by race or creed, but by a single genetic marker. There were humans, and there were mutants, and then there was Izuku. Diagnosed at age 4 as G-negative, a baseline human. In a society grappling with the mutant problem, being normal should have been a relief. For Izuku, it was a curse. He didn't want to be normal. He wanted to be a hero. He spent his nights watching grainy footage of the X-Men, the Avengers, and other powered individuals, his heart aching with a desperate, impossible dream. He filled notebook after notebook with detailed analyses of their powers, their tactics, their weaknesses. Mutant Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. It was his Bible, his obsession, and his greatest shame. He clutched the worn notebook to his chest as he navigated the hallway, keeping his head down. Avoid eye contact. Become wallpaper. These were the first rules of survival. Watch where you're going, Deku! The voice was a familiar explosion of gravel and arrogance. Izuku stumbled, his shoulder stinging from where it had been slammed into a locker. He looked up into the crimson eyes of Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo was everything Izuku was not. Confident, athletic, popular, and most importantly, a mutant. His X-gene had manifested early and with spectacular effect. He could secrete a nitroglycerin-like sweat from his palms and ignite it at will, creating powerful explosions. It was a flashy, destructive, and undeniably impressive ability that had made him the king of Aldera Junior High. Flanking him were his usual sycophants, 2 other boys with minor, almost useless mutations. One could extend his fingers by a few inches, the other had slightly tougher than average skin. They were jackals circling their lion. Sorry, Kaken, Izuku mumbled, the childhood nickname slipping out. It felt like ash in his mouth. They hadn't been friends in a decade, not since Bakugo's powers had come in and Izuku's hadn't. Bakugo sneered, his lips curling back from his teeth. Still carrying that creepy stalker journal around? He snatched the notebook from Izuku's grasp before he could react. What is it today? Cyclops' optic blasts. A study in concussive force? He flipped through the pages, his laughter sharp and cruel. Pathetic. You're a G-neg, a baseline. You'll be lucky to get a job cleaning the toilets at the Daily Bugle, and you're here dreaming about playing with the big boys. Give it back, Kaken, Izuku pleaded, his voice a reedy whisper. His cheeks burned with humiliation. What's that? I can't hear you over the sound of how worthless you are, Bakugo taunted, holding the book just out of reach. A faint, sweet smell, like burnt sugar, began to emanate from his palm. Tiny, almost invisible sparks crackled around his fingers. It was his signature threat, a low-level intimidation tactic that always worked. Please, Izuku said, his voice cracking. That notebook was his entire world. Bakugo's grin widened. You know, Deku, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was more menacing than his shouts, I've been thinking. You want to be a hero so bad, right? I've got a surefire way for you to get a power in your next life. He leaned in close, his hot breath smelling of cinnamon gum. Take a swan dive off the roof of the school. Pray you're born with an X gene next time. The words struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. The hallway, once noisy, seemed to fall silent. Even Bakugo's friends looked uncomfortable. A line had been crossed, but it was the finality in Bakugo's tone, the casual, genuine cruelty of it, that broke something inside Izuku. A cold, hollow feeling filled his chest. All the years of being pushed, of being called useless, of being told his dream was a joke, coalesced into a single, sharp point of despair. Bakugo, sensing his victory, let out a triumphant laugh. He held up the notebook. Here. You can have your stupid dreams back. With a deliberate, theatrical flourish, he set off a small, sharp explosion in his palm. Crack! The notebook was blasted out of his hand, its cover singed and smoking, and it landed in a large, decorative fountain in the school's courtyard, visible through the large glass windows. The pages immediately began to soak, the ink of his painstaking analysis bleeding into the chlorinated water. Izuku just stared. He watched his life's work, the only thing that gave him purpose, dissolve into a pulpy, useless mess. And he felt nothing. The despair had burned away, leaving behind a terrifying emptiness. He turned and walked away, not towards the exit, but towards the courtyard. He could hear Bakugo and his cronies laughing behind him, the sound distant and tinny, as if coming from the other end of a long tunnel. The cool, damp air of the courtyard did nothing to clear his head. He knelt by the fountain, his reflection a wavering, pathetic distortion in the water. He reached a trembling hand in and pulled the ruined notebook out. It was heavier now, waterlogged and dying. He opened it, watching a detailed drawing of Storm's weather manipulation abilities run like mascara. Useless. His word, echoed in his mind. Deku. It meant useless. It was all he was. All he would ever be. Hey! I wasn't done talking to you. Izuku didn't have to look up. Bakugo had followed him, his entourage in tow. The schoolyard had mostly emptied out, leaving them in a secluded corner near the high brick wall that separated the school grounds from the street. What's the matter, Deku? Gonna cry? Bakugo sneered, kicking a loose stone near Izuku's head. Izuku didn't answer. He just clutched the soggy book to his chest, his knuckles white. He felt a strange pressure building behind his eyes, in his chest, in the very marrow of his bones. It was a humming, a vibration that started low and began to climb in pitch. Look at me when I'm talking to you, you genetic defect. Bakugo shoved Izuku's shoulder. Izuku stumbled back, his foot catching on a loose paving stone. He fell hard, the ruined notebook flying from his hands. He landed with a grunt, his head hitting the pavement with a dull thud. For a moment, the world swam in a dizzying haze. Still got nothing to say? Bakugo stood over him, a predator savoring its kill. You're a waste of space, Midoriya. The world is moving on. People like me, we're the future. People like you, you're just holding the rest of us back. You're a reminder of what humanity used to be. Weak. Powerless. Obsolete. He raised his hand, and this time, the sparks were bigger. The smell of burning sugar was thick in the air. A small, contained explosion, no bigger than a firecracker, burst from his palm. It was a warning shot, meant to terrify. And it did. But it did something else, too. As Izuku looked up at Bakugo, at the sneering face framed by the bright, popping light of his power, the humming inside him became a roar. The pressure in his bones became an agonizing, expanding heat. It felt like every cell in his body was a balloon being inflated to the bursting point. A dam inside him, a dam he never knew existed, was cracking under an impossible, cosmic weight. He felt a sudden, phantom chorus of voices in his head, a whisper of ghosts he couldn't understand. It is not ready. The vessel is too weak. A primal fear, colder and deeper than any fear Bakugo had ever inspired, seized him. This wasn't just power, it was wrong. It was too much. It was going to tear him apart. Get away from me, Izuku whispered, the words barely a breath. What was that? Bakugo took a step closer, raising his hand for a larger blast. I think you need to learn your place. Get away! The scream was ripped from Izuku's throat, raw and desperate. On pure, animal instinct, he scrambled backwards and threw his right hand up, not to punch, but to ward off the attack, to push the threat away. It was a gesture of utter desperation, and the universe answered. The energy that had been building inside him, the stockpiled power of generations, a legacy he never knew he carried, surged through his arm in a torrential, uncontrollable flood. It was a force of nature crammed into the frail container of a 14-year-old boy. The world didn't explode. It shattered. There was no sound at first, just a silent, violent displacement of reality. A wave of pure, emerald-green force erupted from Izuku's outstretched hand. It was not a blast. It was a physical punch delivered to the very air itself. The shockwave hit Bakugo first. It wasn't the heat of an explosion. It was the kinetic impact of a freight train. He was lifted off his feet, his sneer frozen on his face, and thrown backwards a dozen yards, tumbling through the air like a rag doll before crashing into the manicured lawn. His two friends, further back, were simply knocked off their feet, their ears ringing. The wall behind where Bakugo had been standing ceased to exist. The solid brick and mortar, 10 feet high and 2 feet thick, didn't crumble or break. It atomized. It turned to a fine red dust that hung in the air for a moment before being blown away by the continuing force of the shockwave. Then came the sound. It was not a boom. It was a singular, definitive crack that was felt as much as it was heard, a sound that vibrated through the ground, rattled teeth in their sockets, and carried for blocks. Every window in the west wing of Aldera Junior High, dozens of them, blew inwards, showering the empty classrooms with glittering shards of glass. Car alarms for 3 blocks in every direction shrieked to life, a discordant symphony of panic. For Izuku, the moment was a confluence of unimaginable power and unbearable agony. He felt the energy surge, a glorious, terrifying tide of green lightning that wrapped around his arm, and then he felt his body break. He heard the snap of his radius and ulna, loud as gunshots in his own ears. He felt his humerus fracture in 3 different places, the bone grinding against itself. His shoulder was wrenched from its socket with a sickening, wet pop. The pain was a white-hot, blinding nova that eclipsed everything. It was absolute. It was all-consuming. He fell to his side, cradling his right arm to his chest. It was a mangled, useless thing, bent at angles that were grotesquely wrong. The sleeve of his jacket was shredded, and beneath it, his skin was already a mottled, bruised canvas of purple and black. The green energy was gone, leaving only the devastating aftermath. The world came rushing back in a blur of sensations. The stench of ozone and pulverized brick. The incessant blare of car alarms. The distant shouting of teachers and the first terrified screams of students who had witnessed the event from other parts of the school. He could see Bakugo, slowly, painfully, pushing himself up, his face a mask of utter shock and, for the first time in his life, genuine fear. His crimson eyes were wide, fixed on Izuku not as Deku, the worthless baseline, but as something new. Something monstrous. Something terrifying. Izuku didn't care. The only thing he could focus on was the pain and a rising tide of horror and guilt. I did this, he thought, his mind struggling to form coherent sentences through the fog of agony. I broke the wall. The windows. I heard him. I heard Kaken. A sob tore itself from his throat, a ragged, hitching sound. Tears streamed down his face, cutting clean paths through the dust and grime that coated his cheeks. He looked at his ruined arm, at the destruction around him, and he saw a monster. He was the monster. The power that he had dreamed of his entire life, the power to be a hero, had finally come, and it had revealed him to be a villain. Hundreds of miles away, in a quiet, stately mansion nestled in Westchester County, Charles Xavier paused, his teacup halfway to his lips. He sat opposite Aurora Monroe in his study, a room lined with books from floor to ceiling, the scent of old paper and lemon tea perfuming the air. A half-finished game of chess sat between them on a low mahogany table. Is something wrong, Charles? Aurora asked, her voice as calm and gentle as a summer breeze. Her stark white hair was a striking contrast to her dark skin, and her blue eyes, which could command the fury of a hurricane, were now soft with concern. Charles didn't answer immediately. He closed his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration. As a telepath of unparalleled power, he was constantly filtering the psychic noise of humanity, the endless chatter of 7 billion minds. It was a constant, low-level hum in the background of his consciousness, a sea of thought and emotion he had long ago learned to navigate. But this was different. This was not a part of the sea. This was a tsunami. A psychic cataclysm had just erupted somewhere on the planet. It was not the cold, structured malice of a mind like Magneto's, nor the chaotic terror of a new mutant's powers manifesting violently. It was something more. Something purer. He felt a supernova of raw, untamed potential ignite in the collective unconscious. It was a psychic signature of such magnitude that it dwarfed anything he had ever encountered. It was an ocean of power where most mutants were merely pawns. It was a newborn star, blinding in its brilliance. And woven through this incredible power was a thread of pure, unadulterated agony and terror. It was the cry of a child holding a nuclear weapon he didn't know how to disarm, terrified that it was about to detonate. "Ororo," he said, his voice low and strained. He opened his eyes, and they were filled with a profound urgency. "Prepare the Blackbird. We must leave at once." "Charles, what is it?" Storm rose from her seat, her regal composure instantly replaced by the focused readiness of an X-Man. "Is it Eric?" "No. Not Eric," Charles said, already maneuvering his wheelchair towards the hidden elevator that led down to the sublevels of the mansion. "Something new. Something. Omega." He didn't need to say more. The designation was enough. Omega level. A mutant with power that was deemed to have an undefinable upper limit. A mutant who could, in theory, reshape the world. They were exceedingly rare, forces of nature that had to be approached with the utmost care. Jean Grey was one. Storm herself was another, but the signature Charles had felt, it was on another scale entirely. He guided his wheelchair into a large, circular chamber, its metallic walls gleaming under soft blue light. At its center was a raised platform with a helmet connected by a series of thick cables. "Cerebro. I need to pinpoint the location," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the chamber. "Is that wise?" Ororo cautioned, her hand resting on his shoulder. "A mind that powerful, and that unstable, a direct link could be dangerous." "It is a necessary risk," Charles replied, his expression grim. He took a deep breath and placed the helmet over his head. "I must get to him before someone else does. If the government detects this energy signature, they will send sentinels. If Eric feels it..." He trailed off, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Magneto would see such a mutant not as a child in need of help, but as the ultimate weapon for his cause. The world dissolved. Charles Xavier's consciousness expanded, soaring out from the confines of his body. Guided by the lingering psychic echo, he flew over cities and towns, a phantom presence sweeping across the state of New York. He sifted through millions of minds, searching for the source, for that blinding sun of power and pain. He found it. Yonkers. A junior high school. The psychic landscape was a maelstrom of fear, confusion, and panic. And at its epicenter, a boy. Charles focused, carefully pushing past the layers of raw, chaotic emotion. He saw through the boy's eyes. A shattered arm. A demolished wall. The horrified face of another boy, and an overwhelming, crushing wave of self-hatred. "Monster. I'm a monster. I hurt people. I'm not a hero. I'm a villain." The psychic feedback was so intense, so filled with pure anguish, that Charles physically recoiled, gasping for breath as he pulled his consciousness back. He ripped the helmet from his head, his hands shaking slightly. "I have him," he said to Ororo, his voice strained. "Aldera Junior High in Yonkers." The manifestation was catastrophic. "He is terrified, and he is in immense pain. We will go to him," Storm said, her voice a calm, reassuring anchor. There was no question, no hesitation. This was their purpose. This was the reason the X-Men existed, to find those who were lost and afraid, and to offer them a home. The world had shrunk to the throbbing, nauseating universe of his own pain. Izuku was on his knees, his forehead pressed against the cool, damp grass. He was vaguely aware of sirens growing closer, of teachers shouting his name, their voices laced with a fear that made him flinch. He didn't want them to come near him. He was dangerous. He was broken. "Midoriya! Stay right there. Don't move." It was Principal Kobayakawa, his voice strained through a megaphone from a safe distance. Izuku didn't have the strength to move even if he wanted to. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and the edges of his vision began to go dark. Shock was setting in. He could see the paramedics arriving, but they were keeping their distance, waiting for the police. They were looking at him the same way everyone else was, like he was a bomb that might go off again. He saw them attending to Bakugo, who was now sitting up, clutching his head but otherwise seemingly unharmed, though his eyes never left Izuku. The fear in them had been replaced by something else, something dark and unreadable. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. He just wanted it to stop. The pain, the sirens, the staring. He wanted to disappear. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos. A low, powerful hum from above. He looked up, his vision swimming, and saw a sleek, black jet descending from the sky. It had no markings, no visible engines, and it moved with an unnatural, silent grace. It settled onto the school's soccer field, 100 yards away, its landing ramp lowering with a soft hiss. Two figures emerged. The first was a woman of breathtaking beauty and regal bearing. She had skin the color of rich earth and a mane of pure white hair that flowed around her shoulders. She wore a simple but elegant black uniform with a red and gold X emblem on the collar. As she walked, the wind seemed to swirl around her respectfully, and the chaotic energy of the scene seemed to calm, as if the very atmosphere was soothed by her presence. The second figure was a man in a fine tweed suit, seated in a high-tech wheelchair that glided effortlessly over the uneven grass. He was bald, with a kind, intelligent face and eyes that seemed to hold a universe of wisdom and compassion. He looked directly at Izuku, not at the destruction around him, but at him. The police and paramedics tensed, shouting at the newcomers to stay back. The woman, Storm, simply raised a hand, and a gentle but firm wall of wind prevented anyone from getting closer, kicking up just enough dust to create a curtain of privacy. The man in the wheelchair stopped a few feet away from Izuku. He didn't seem afraid. His expression was one of profound empathy. "Hello, Izuku," the man said, his voice calm and resonant. It wasn't just a sound that Izuku heard with his ears. He felt it in his mind, a gentle, soothing touch that pushed back the screaming pain and panic, offering a moment of clarity. "My name is Charles Xavier. This is my friend, Ororo Monroe." Izuku stared, his mind struggling to process what was happening. He knew that name. Charles Xavier. The world's foremost expert on genetic mutation. A public advocate for mutant rights. A man who was rumored to be a powerful mutant himself. How do you know my name?" Izuku stammered, his voice hoarse. "I am like you, Izuku," Charles said softly. "I am a mutant. And I felt your pain." He gestured slightly towards the chaos. "And your fear." Izuku flinched, pulling his broken arm tighter against his body. I didn't mean to," he whispered, the tears starting again. "I lost control. I'm a monster." "You are not a monster," Charles said, his voice firm but kind, cutting through Izuku's self-loathing. "You are a young man who has just undergone a traumatic experience. A power like yours, lying dormant for so long, its first awakening was bound to be violent. It is not a reflection of who you are. It is only a measure of what you must learn to control." Ororo knelt down, her movements fluid and graceful. She didn't try to touch him, respecting his space. "The first time I called the lightning," she said, her voice a low, melodic murmur, "I nearly destroyed my village. I thought I had been cursed by a vengeful god. I was terrified of what I was. But I learned. You can learn too." Izuku looked from her kind face to Charles's steady, reassuring gaze. For the first time since the explosion, he felt a flicker of something other than terror. It was a fragile, tentative shoot of hope. They weren't looking at him like a weapon or a freak. They were looking at him like a person. A kid who was scared and hurt. "The world is not a kind place for people like us, Izuku," Charles continued, his expression turning serious. "Many will fear you for what you can do. They will want to control you, use you, or destroy you. The authorities who are on their way now, they will not understand. They will see only the destruction and the danger." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "But there is another way. I run a school. A safe place for young mutants, hidden from the fear and prejudice of the world. It is a place where you can heal, A place where you can learn to understand and master the incredible gift you have been given. A place where you will not be alone. He offered his hand not physically, but with his words, with his presence. Come with us, Izuku. Come to my institute. Let us help you. Izuku looked back at the school, at the frightened faces of his teachers, at the police officers setting up a perimeter. He saw Bakugo being led away by a paramedic, the boy glancing back over his shoulder with that strange, unreadable expression. This world, the only one he had ever known, was no longer his. He had shattered it with a single, desperate gesture. He could never go back. He looked at his arm, at the source of his agony and his power. The pain was still there, a roaring fire, but Charles's mental presence was like a cool bomb, keeping it from overwhelming him completely. He had a choice. He could stay here and be swallowed by the fear and the consequences, or he could go with these strangers who spoke of hope and understanding. It wasn't a choice at all. Tears still tracking through the dust on his face, Izuku Midoriya looked at Professor Charles Xavier and gave a single, shaky nod. It was the end of his old life, and the first, terrifying step into a new one. The world returned to Izuku Midoriya in disjointed fragments. The throbbing, all-consuming agony in his arm was the first and most persistent sensation, a screaming sun around which everything else orbited. Then came the low, resonant hum of powerful engines, a vibration that ran through the comfortable reclining seat he found himself strapped into. The air smelled clean and sterile, a stark contrast to the dust and ozone of the schoolyard. He cracked his eyes open, blinking against the soft, indirect lighting of the cabin. He wasn't in an ambulance. He was inside the sleek, black jet he had seen land. Through a thick, reinforced window, the ground was a patchwork of green and gray, receding at an impossible speed. His breath hitched. He was flying. Easy, son. You're safe now. The voice was Professor Xavier's, a calm, steady anchor in his sea of panic. The man was seated opposite him, his wheelchair secured to the cabin floor. The woman with the white hair, Ororo, was in the cockpit, her silhouette visible against the dizzying array of glowing instruments. Izuku tried to sit up, a gasp of pain escaping his lips as he jostled his ruined arm. It was crudely splinted and wrapped, a temporary measure taken before they had lifted off, but it did little to mute the deep, grinding ache in his shattered bones. Try not to move too much, the professor advised, his gaze gentle but penetrating. We will have your arm properly seen to once we arrive at the institute. Dr. McCoy is the best in his field. Dr. McCoy? Izuku mumbled, his thoughts sluggish. The geneticist? The one who publicly advocates for mutant physiology studies? He knew the name from his research. A brilliant mind, though controversial for his own status as a publicly known mutant. A small smile touched Xavier's lips. The very same. He is our resident physician, among many other things. He paused, his expression softening with empathy. I know this is overwhelming, Izuku. You have a great many questions, and I promise they will all be answered. For now, just rest. You have been through a terrible ordeal. Xavier's voice had a unique quality. It wasn't just heard, it was felt. As he spoke, a wave of tranquility washed over the jagged edges of Izuku's fear. It didn't erase the terror, but it contained it, allowing him to breathe, to think. It was a subtle, comforting pressure in his mind, a silent promise of safety. Izuku sank back into the plush seat, his body trembling with a mixture of pain, adrenaline, and shock. He glanced at his left hand, the one that wasn't a mangled mess. He flexed his fingers. It seemed so normal, so utterly benign. How could the same body that held this mundane hand also contain that? The green cataclysm. The power that had demolished a wall and broken him in the process. He wasn't just gene negative. He was a walking natural disaster. The doctors had been wrong. So very, very wrong. The flight was shorter than he expected. Before he could fully process the reality of his situation, the jet began a smooth descent. Through the window, he saw a sprawling estate emerge from the lush forests of Westchester County. A magnificent, old-world mansion stood at the heart of it, complete with a grand fountain and perfectly manicured gardens. It looked like something from a historical film, an anachronism of stone and ivy in a world of steel and glass. It was beautiful, peaceful, and utterly incongruous with the high-tech jet currently landing on a hidden runway that appeared as panels of the lawn retracted into the earth. As the ramp lowered, the air that greeted them was fresh and clean, scented with pine and damp earth. Ororo emerged from the cockpit and offered Izuku a reassuring smile. "Welcome to the Xavier Institute for Gifted Youngsters," she said, her voice like the whisper of wind through leaves. The name sounded so normal, so academic. It didn't sound like the headquarters for a clandestine team of mutant heroes. But as they entered the mansion through a discreet door in the hangar, the duality of the place became immediately apparent. The hallway was paneled in rich, dark mahogany, with ornate gold leaf trim and portraits of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls. But set into the wall was a holographic display showing weather patterns across the globe, and a young girl with iridescent, dragonfly-like wings zipped past them in the air, giggling as she chased a floating orb of light. It was a place of impossible contrasts, and Izuku, his mind reeling, could only stare in wide-eyed wonder. Professor Xavier led the way, his wheelchair gliding silently over the polished hardwood floors. "Our first priority is that arm," he said, guiding them towards a pair of heavy, metallic doors that hissed open to reveal not another stately room, but a state-of-the-art medical bay. The room was a symphony of chrome and white, filled with machines that hummed with quiet power. Screens displayed complex biological data, and articulated robotic arms were tucked neatly into ceiling compartments. Dominating the center of the room was a large, powerfully built man with a shocking mane of blue fur. He was hanging upside down from a set of gymnastic rings suspended from the ceiling, reading a thick leather-bound book and wearing a pair of spectacles perched precariously on his nose. "Hank," Professor Xavier said with an air of fond exasperation, "we have a new arrival in need of your attention." The blue-furred man, Dr. Henry Hank McCoy, swung down with a primate's grace, landing softly on his large, digitigrade feet. He was massive, easily close to 7 feet tall, with the build of a linebacker, and the face of a gentle, scholarly gorilla. He wore a white lab coat over his blue fur, which seemed both professional and faintly absurd. "Ah, Charles." "Excellent," he boomed, his voice a deep, erudite baritone. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Izuku, his intelligent eyes immediately focusing on the mangled arm. "Oh, my stars and garters! A traumatic manifestation of the highest order." He beckoned Izuku over to an examination bed. Come, young man, let's have a look. The flesh is heir to 1,000 natural shocks, as the bard would say, but this appears to be a shock of a rather unnatural variety." Izuku, intimidated by the doctor's sheer presence but reassured by his gentle demeanor, sat on the edge of the bed. Hank's large, blue-furred hands were surprisingly delicate as he carefully cut away the ruined jacket sleeve and the makeshift bandages. He let out a low whistle as he saw the full extent of the damage. Compound fractures of the radius and ulna, a spiral fracture of the humerus, complete dislocation of the glenohumeral joint. "You've made quite a mess of yourself, son," he said, his tone one of clinical fascination rather than judgment. He used a handheld scanner, and a 3D holographic image of Izuku's arm, glowing with red stress indicators, appeared in the air between them. "The cellular degradation is fascinating. It's not just the kinetic force of the recoil. Your own power has literally burned out your cells. The energy output vastly exceeds the biological tolerance of the conduit, in this case your arm." Izuku paled, the technical jargon making the reality of his self-inflicted injury even more terrifying. Can you fix it?" Hank chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. "My dear boy, in this house, we can fix almost anything." He turned to a console. "We'll start with a cellular regeneration catalyst and a light spray of biosynthetic foam to set the bones. It will feel peculiar." A robotic arm descended from the ceiling, emitting a fine, cool mist over Izuku's arm. It felt cold, then intensely warm, and he could feel a strange, deep tingling as the mist seeped into his skin. The pain began to recede, replaced by a dull, pulsing sensation. Then, a thicker, white foam was applied, which quickly hardened into a lightweight, form-fitting cast. "The foam contains nanites that will align the bones perfectly," Hank explained, watching the readings on his monitor. "The catalyst will accelerate the healing process by a factor of several hundred. You should have full mobility back in a few hours, though the muscle and nerve damage will require another day or so of therapy." "You were very lucky." Any more power and you might have torn the limb from your body entirely. Izuku swallowed hard, the image searing itself into his mind. My power. What is it? Professor Xavier, who had been observing quietly, glided forward. That is the question of the hour, isn't it? From what I could sense, and from Hank's initial analysis, your mutant ability appears to be the stockpiling and releasing of raw kinetic energy. A power you have, unknowingly, been accumulating your entire life. Hank nodded enthusiastically, pushing his glasses up his nose. Precisely. That's why your initial medical scans would have shown you as G-negative. The X gene wasn't expressing an active ability. It was simply charging. Like a biological battery. When you were under extreme duress, you didn't just turn the power on, you discharged the entire battery in a single, explosive burst. I would tentatively call it a kinetic stockpile ability. Izuku's mind, always analytical, latched onto the explanation. It made a horrifying kind of sense. All those years of feeling inadequate, of being powerless, he had been a walking power plant, waiting to go critical. So, I can't use it without this? He gestured to his now encased arm. At present, no, Hank said gravely. Your body is a standard baseline human physique. It's like trying to fire a naval cannon from a canoe. The canoe, in this case your arm, is obliterated by the recoil. Your potential energy output is, to put it mildly, astronomical. Your physical vessel, however, is tragically fragile. A classic glass cannon. The words hung in the air, a devastating diagnosis. He had the power he always dreamed of, but using it would destroy him. The cruelest of ironies. Seeing the despair on Izuku's face, the professor interjected. That is why you are here, Izuku. To learn. To train. To strengthen your body so that it can one day become a worthy vessel for your gift, not its victim. A cheerful voice cut through the heavy atmosphere. Is this the new guy? Did he break something already? That's usually Logan's job. A teenage girl popped her head into the medbay. She had brown hair, a bright, friendly smile, and was wearing a yellow and black uniform. The most remarkable thing about her was that she hadn't opened the door. Her head and shoulders were simply sticking through the solid metal. Kitty, a little privacy, please, Hank said, though there was no real annoyance in his tone. The girl, Kitty Pride, phased the rest of her body through the door with a faint whoosh. Sorry, Hank. Professor X asked me to come grab him when you were done. Said he needed the grand tour before Scott tried to scare him off with a lecture on collateral damage. She grinned at Izuku. I'm Kitty. Codename, Shadowcat. I can walk through walls. What's your deal? Izuku blinked, overwhelmed by her bubbly energy. I'm Izuku Midoriya. I don't have a codename. My deal is, I break things. Mostly myself. Kitty's grin softened into a sympathetic smile. Yeah, a lot of us start out that way. Come on, I'll show you around. This place is huge, you'll get lost for a week if you don't get the basic layout. With a nod from the professor, Izuku slid off the bed. His arm felt strangely light in its new cast. He followed Kitty out of the medbay, back into the strange hybrid world of a historical mansion and a sci-fi base. So, the ground floor is mostly the academic wing, Kitty explained, talking a mile a minute as she led him down a long corridor. Regular classes, like math, history, literature. The professor is big on us getting a real education, not just learning how to punch things. She gestured to a classroom they passed, where a half-dozen students of varying appearances, one had scaly blue skin, another had small, feathered wings, were listening to a lecture on Shakespeare. The second floor is the dorms. Boys on the west wing, girls on the east. Don't phase into the girls' wing. I'm the only one allowed to do that, and it's a privilege I don't extend lightly, she said with a wink. The grounds are huge. We've got a lake, a boathouse, and a basketball court. Just try not to punch the basketball into orbit. We lost the last one that way. She led him to a large, comfortable common room, filled with worn sofas and a big screen TV. A few older students were lounging around. One of them, a massive young man whose skin was made of what looked like organic steel, waved a metallic hand at Kitty. Hey, Pyotr, Kitty called back. This is Izuku. Pyotr, Colossus, gave Izuku a warm, gentle smile that was at odds with his intimidating appearance. "Welcome to the Institute," he said, his Russian accent thick. Izuku felt a thrill of recognition. Colossus. He was in his notebooks. He knew his powers, his supposed strength levels, his history with the team. To see him in person, just relaxing on a sofa, was surreal. Kitty then led him to a grand staircase. "Okay, now for the cool stuff. The sublevels are where the X-Men business happens. Hangar for the Blackbird is down there, Hank's main labs, the briefing room, and—" She paused dramatically before a set of massive, bank vault-like doors made of a dark, polished metal. "The danger room." Izuku stared at the doors, a sense of awe and trepidation washing over him. The danger room. The legendary training facility of the X-Men. "We can't go in right now, it's being recalibrated," Kitty said. "But that's where we train. It can create any environment, any enemy, you can think of. It's basically the world's most terrifying and awesome video game." As they turned to leave, they nearly collided with a group of people walking down the corridor. Izuku recognized them instantly from news reports and grainy online videos. They were the X-Men. At the front was Cyclops, Scott Summers, tall and lean in his blue and gold uniform. The ruby quartz visor that covered his eyes gave him an imposing, unreadable expression. At his side was Jean Grey, her red hair a vibrant flame against her own uniform, her green eyes filled with a warmth that seemed to radiate from her. And lagging slightly behind them, shorter but with a presence that took up twice as much space, was Wolverine. He was exactly as the legends described, compact, impossibly muscular, with wild, dark hair that swept back into 2 points like horns. He wore a brown and tan costume, and he was chewing on an unlit cigar, his expression a mask of perpetual irritation. Kitty immediately straightened up. "Scott! Jean! Logan! This is our new student, Izuku Midoriya." Scott's gaze swept over Izuku, and even without seeing his eyes, Izuku felt like he was being scanned, analyzed, and judged. "Midoriya," Scott said, his voice clipped and all business. "I've read the preliminary report on the incident in Yonkers. A city block's worth of property damage and one person hospitalized for observation." Izuku flinched. "He's okay? Kaken, the other boy?" "He was released with minor bruising," Scott replied, his tone not softening. "You were lucky. Extremely lucky. Power on that scale, unleashed without control in a civilian area, is a worst-case scenario. It's the kind of event that gets anti-mutant legislation passed overnight. It's the reason Trask gets funding for his Sentinels." Every word was a hammer blow to Izuku's already fragile conscience. He looked down at the floor, shame burning in his chest. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "None of us ever mean to," Scott said, his voice losing its hard edge, replaced by a weary sort of resignation. "Intention doesn't matter. Control is the only thing that matters. That's the first thing you need to learn here. Your power isn't a toy. It's a weapon, whether you want it to be or not. You need to treat it with that level of respect and discipline. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Izuku mumbled. Wolverine let out a low, gravelly snort. He took the cigar from his mouth and pointed it at Izuku's cast. "Great," he grumbled, his voice like rocks tumbling downhill. "Another one that breaks himself. I can smell the fear and self-pity on you from here, kid. That's gonna get you killed faster than any bad guy." He took a step closer, his eyes, dark and ancient, boring into Izuku. "Let me give you some advice. All that power you got locked up inside you? It ain't worth squat if you're a glass cannon. You're a liability. To yourself, and to everyone around you. You want to stop being a liability? Toughen up. And stop breaking your damn bones." With that, Logan brushed past him, heading down the hall without a backward glance. Izuku felt himself shrink under the weight of the two veterans' assessments. They saw him as a risk, a problem to be managed, a fragile, dangerous child. They were right. "Don't mind them," a soft voice said. Jean Grey had stepped forward, a kind, gentle smile on her face. As she looked at him, Izuku felt something different from the professor's calming presence. This was a direct, profound connection. He felt a wave of pure empathy wash over him, as if she could see right through his fear and shame to the frantic, desperate desire that lay beneath. Scott's the leader, she said, her voice low and soothing. He has to see the big picture, the risks. And Logan, well, Logan's Logan. He's seen too many powerful kids get hurt because they couldn't handle what was inside them. It's their way of showing they care, even if it doesn't feel like it. She placed a gentle hand on his good shoulder. Izuku didn't flinch. Her touch was warm, and with it came a feeling of being truly seen. I can feel it, you know, she whispered, so only he could hear. Beneath all the fear. You have a good heart, Izuku. You want to be a hero. More than almost anyone I've ever met. That's why you're so scared. You're not afraid of the power. You're afraid of what it might make you do, afraid you'll fail to be the person you want to be. Tears pricked at the corners of Izuku's eyes. She understood. In a way no one else ever had, she understood the core of his being. That's a good thing, she continued, squeezing his shoulder gently. That's what separates us from the villains. Don't ever lose that. We can teach you control. We can teach you how to fight, but we can't teach you how to have a hero's heart. You've already got that part covered. She gave him one last, encouraging smile before following Scott. Izuku stood there, frozen, her words echoing in his mind. Kitty gave him a sympathetic look. See? Total good cop, bad cop, and whatever Logan is. You get used to it. The final stop on the tour was Professor Xavier's study. It was the epitome of the mansion's classic aesthetic, a vast, circular room lined with thousands of books. A large bay window looked out over the sprawling lawn, and a fire crackled warmly in a grand fireplace. The professor was waiting for him, a chessboard set up on the table beside him. Please, Izuku, have a seat, he said, gesturing to a comfortable leather armchair. I imagine your head is spinning. Izuku nodded, sinking into the chair. A little. Your new teammates can be intense, Xavier acknowledged. But their concerns are valid. And Jean's assessment of you is equally so. He steepled his fingers, his expression thoughtful. I wanted to talk to you about the true nature of your power. Hank was correct. You have been storing energy your entire life. But what I felt from you, psychically, was more than that. It was old. It felt like a legacy. He looked at Izuku intently. Do you know of any other mutants in your family? Izuku shook his head. No, sir. The doctor said my family's genetics were completely baseline. Interesting. No matter. What's important is what we do now, Xavier said. Your power classifies you as an Omega-level mutant. Izuku's eyes widened. He knew the term from his notebooks. It was a classification reserved for the most powerful mutants on the planet, those with abilities that had no discernible upper limit. Jean Grey and her telekinesis. Storm and her control over the weather. Magneto. Me? He squeaked. But I can't even use my power without breaking. Potential, Izuku. Not realized ability, the professor corrected gently. An Omega-level designation means your potential for power is, theoretically, infinite. You could become one of the most powerful beings on this planet. Which is precisely why your training must be so rigorous. A man who can lift a car must learn control. A man who can shatter mountains must achieve nothing less than perfect mastery, or he risks destroying everything he holds dear. The scale of it was terrifying. Shatter mountains. He had demolished a wall, and it had felt like his arm had been dipped in lava. The gulf between what he was and what he could be seemed impossibly vast. You will begin your training tomorrow, Xavier continued. In the danger room. It will not be easy. It will be painful and frustrating. You will be pushed to your limits, physically and emotionally, but it is the only way. The only way for you to become the hero you so desperately wish to be. He looked at Izuku, his wise eyes holding no pity, only profound belief. From your friend's taunts, I understand you were called Deku. Izuku flinched, the name still a fresh wound. It means useless, he mumbled. A word is just a container for meaning, the professor said softly. The meaning can be changed. In a different dialect, it can also be interpreted as one who can do it. A symbol of perseverance. What that name means, from this day forward, is entirely up to you. The meeting was over. Izuku was shown to his new room in the dorms, a simple, clean space with a bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the peaceful grounds. It was more space than he'd ever had to himself. He sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the storm in his mind. Omega level. Kinetic stockpile. A glass cannon. A hero's heart. He looked at his cast, a pristine white shell hiding the broken mess within. It was a perfect metaphor for his existence. Inside him was a power that could shake the world, but he was trapped in a body too weak to contain it. He thought of Scott's cold pragmatism, of Logan's gruff dismissal. He thought of Jean's unbelievable kindness, the first real validation he had ever felt. And he thought of the professor's challenge. His exhaustion was a physical weight, but beneath it, a tiny flame of determination, lit by Jean's words and fanned by the professor's belief, began to burn. He was scared. He was terrified of the power, of the pain, of failing everyone, of failing himself. But he was more scared of remaining the person he had been yesterday. Helpless, useless Deku. Later that evening, a fully healed Izuku, his arms sore but functional, found himself standing once more before the massive, metallic doors of the danger room. Kitty had been right. The nanites and catalysts had worked miracles. His bones were whole, though his muscles ached with a deep, phantom memory of the trauma. One of the senior students, a quiet boy named Forge with a genius for technology, was running diagnostics, so the doors were slightly ajar. Izuku peeked inside. The room was a vast, empty grid of metallic tiles, deceptively simple. He knew, from his notebooks, that this blank canvas could become a raging battlefield, an alien landscape, or the heart of a collapsing star. It was a room of infinite possibilities and infinite dangers. This was it. This was where his new life would begin. Where he would either learn to master the storm inside him, or be torn apart by it. He remembered the feeling of the power surging through him, the split second of glorious, terrifying might before the agony. He remembered the look of pure shock on Bakugo's face. He remembered the sound of his own bones snapping. His hand, the one that had channeled the blast, began to tremble. But he didn't turn away. He stood there, in the quiet hallway of the impossible mansion that was now his home, and stared into the heart of his future. He was determined. He was terrified, and for the first time in his life, he was not alone. The doors to the danger room sealed behind Izuku Midoriya with a heavy, pneumatic hiss that seemed to suck all the air and confidence from his lungs. He stood in the center of a vast, empty chamber, 100-foot cube tiled with a featureless gray metal that gleamed under cold, recessed lighting. The air was sterile, smelling of ozone and latent power. It felt less like a training room and more like the inside of a massive, sleeping machine. His newly healed arm felt strange, a phantom ache still residing deep in the mended bone. Dr. McCoy had declared him fully fit, the nanites and regeneration catalyst having worked their miracles overnight. Physically, he was whole. Mentally, he was a wreck, haunted by the memory of splintering bone and the visceral feeling of his own body tearing itself apart. "Can you hear me, Izuku?" Professor Xavier's voice echoed through the chamber, seemingly from all directions at once. It was calm and steady, a lighthouse in the fog of Izuku's anxiety. "Why yes, Professor," Izuku called out, his voice sounding small and thin in the immense space. "Excellent. You are in the observation booth, correct, Scott?" "I'm here, Professor," a second, more clipped voice responded. "Scott Summers. Cyclops. Jean and Logan are here as well." Izuku glanced up at a dark strip of reinforced glass high on one wall. He couldn't see them, but he could feel their eyes on him. He felt like a specimen under a microscope. A fragile, volatile specimen. "The objective for today is simple, Izuku," the professor continued. "Control. We are not testing your limits. We are not interested in destructive output. We simply want you to access a minuscule fraction of your power, consciously and deliberately, and deploy it at a target. The danger room will now initialize training sequence, Midoriya 01. The world dissolved around him. The gray tiles flickered and transformed, the hard light holographic projectors and shifting physical matter of the room reconfiguring with terrifying speed. In seconds, he was no longer in an empty cube. He stood in the middle of a ruined cityscape. Shattered skyscrapers clawed at a bruised, twilight sky. The ground was a treacherous landscape of rubble and rusted, overturned cars. The air tasted of dust and decay. It looked disturbingly similar to the aftermath he had created at his school, a detail he was certain was intentional. A sleek, chrome drone, roughly the size of a microwave oven, zipped out from behind a pile of debris and hovered 20 feet in front of him. It had a single, glowing red optical sensor. "Your target," Scott's voice announced, devoid of emotion. "It is lightly armored. A bare minimum of force is required. Show us what you can do." Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the tremor in his hands. He remembered the feeling, the torrent of energy, the green lightning. It was a raging river, and last time, he had opened the floodgates completely. This time, he just needed to open them a crack. Just a trickle. He faced the drone, planting his feet in what he hoped was a stable fighting stance, mimicking a posture he'd seen Captain America use in a video. He raised his right arm, the one he had broken. His mind screamed at him in protest. "Don't do it. You'll just break it again." He ignored the voice. He had to. This was why he was here. He focused, trying to reach inside himself for that well of power. He found it easily enough. It was a sun of churning green energy in the core of his being, vast and terrifying. He tried to draw just a sliver of it, a single, tiny spark, and send it down his arm to his hand. He extended his index and middle fingers, remembering how a flick of his fingers had been enough to generate a gale-force wind back in his world, a world that felt 1,000,000 miles away. He focused all his will, just a little. 5%. No less. 1%. He felt the energy surge. It was too eager, too powerful. It wasn't a trickle, it was a fire hose. He tried to choke it back, but it was too late. A bead of emerald light gathered at the tip of his fingers. Panicked, he flicked his wrist. Crack! The air in front of him tore apart. The resulting shockwave, a miniature version of the blast that had demolished the school wall, was still catastrophically oversized for the task. It didn't just hit the drone, it vaporized it. The chrome chassis, the internal wiring, the red optic sensor, all of it was reduced to glittering dust in less than a microsecond. The shockwave continued, slamming into the holographic ruins behind the target, and causing them to flicker violently, the simulation struggling to maintain integrity against a force it hadn't been calibrated for. A split second after the crack of displaced air, two other, smaller sounds followed in quick succession. The sharp, crystalline snaps of his own bones. A scream caught in Izuku's throat as a familiar, white-hot agony erupted in his hand. He stumbled back, clutching his arm to his chest. He looked down. His index and middle fingers were bent at a sickening, unnatural angle. Broken. Again. Terminate sequence, Scott's voice commanded, flat and immediate. The ruined city vanished, replaced once more by the sterile gray grid. A panel in the wall slid open, and Dr. McCoy entered, carrying a medical kit and wearing an expression that was a mixture of scientific fascination and weary resignation. "Well, the good news is you're consistent," Hank said, gently taking Izuku's hand. "The bad news is you're consistent." As Hank sprayed his fingers with the now familiar regeneration foam, Izuku looked up at the observation window, his face burning with shame. He had failed. In the very first test, in the most basic way possible, he had failed. He was uncontrollable. He was a liability. Wolverine was right. The next few days bled into a miserable, repeating cycle of failure and pain. Each morning began with a flicker of hope in Izuku's chest, and each afternoon ended with a trip to the med bay and the bitter taste of disappointment. They tried different approaches. They had him focus on non-combat tasks, like trying to gently push a block of wood across a table. The block of wood was reduced to splinters, and his metacarpals shattered. They had him try channeling the energy through his leg. He managed to stomp a hole 3 inches deep into the reinforced floor of the danger room before his tibia and fibula fractured under the strain. The nadir came during a session being personally supervised by Cyclops. The scenario was more complex. 3 drones, moving in coordinated attack patterns. They're firing low-intensity plasma bolts, Midoriya, Scott's voice instructed from the booth. They won't kill you, but they'll hurt. The objective is to evade and disable. Focus on control. Izuku dodged and weaved, his natural agility serving him well. But he was outmatched. A plasma bolt clipped his shoulder, and the pain was a searing, electric shock. He was cornered, 2 drones flanking him while a third advanced from the front. There was no escape. Control is the only thing that matters, Scott had said, but in that moment, instinct took over. Survival. He needed to take them out, and he needed to do it now. He poured more energy into his arm than ever before, consciously pushing past his previous limits. The pain was a secondary concern. 10%, he thought, a desperate calculation in the heat of battle. It has to be enough. He planted his feet, grit his teeth, and threw a full-force punch at the central drone. Detroit smash! He roared, the name of his favorite hero's home city a primal battle cry. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. A vortex of emerald lightning wrapped around his arm as he punched. The resulting explosion of force was beyond anything he had produced yet. The 3 drones were obliterated, their metal frames shredded and torn apart as if by a giant, invisible hand. The shockwave blew a 10-foot-wide crater in the floor and cracked the back wall of the danger room, a web of fractures spreading from the point of impact. In the observation booth, the reinforced glass vibrated violently. Jean gasped. Scott swore under his breath. Logan just shook his head slowly. For Izuku, there was a fleeting, terrifying moment of triumph. He had done it. He had defeated the enemy. And then, the recoil hit him. It wasn't a sharp snap this time. It was a deep, wet, grinding pop. The force of the punch, rebounding through his own skeletal structure, had wrenched his entire arm from his shoulder socket. The pain was a blinding, sickening wave that stole his breath and sent him crashing to his knees. His arm hung limp and useless at his side, a dead weight of agony. He could feel the head of the humerus grinding against his clavicle. Nausea roiled in his gut, and the room began to spin. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was Hank McCoy running towards him, his blue-furred face etched with genuine alarm. When he woke up, he was in his bed in the dorms, not the med bay. His shoulder was tightly wrapped, and a dull, throbbing ache was all that remained of the excruciating pain. Sunlight streamed through his window. It was the next morning. He had been benched. Professor Xavier had spoken to him gently but firmly. His training in the danger room was suspended indefinitely. Until they could find a way for him to access his power safely, he was a danger to himself and the facility. The sense of failure was a physical weight, heavier than any fatigue. He was useless. Deku. The name echoed in the silent room, a final, damning judgment. He spent the next 2 days in a fugue of despair. He attended the regular academic classes with the younger students, feeling like a fraud. He ate his meals in silence, avoiding the sympathetic glances of Kitty and the other students. He saw the core X-Men only in passing, and he couldn't bring himself to meet their eyes. On the 3rd day, he couldn't stand the idleness any longer. His mind, always racing, needed a problem to solve. And the greatest problem he had ever faced was himself. He went to the Institute's library, a magnificent, 2-story room that smelled of old paper and wood polish. He checked out a stack of blank notebooks and a set of fine-tipped pens. Back in his room, he sat at his desk and opened the first one. On the cover, in his neat, precise handwriting, he wrote, Mutant Analysis for the Future, Volume 1. It was a new beginning. His old notebooks were a waterlogged ruin, a relic of a dream that had nearly killed him. This one was different. This wasn't about hero worship. This was about survival. He started with what he knew. He drew detailed diagrams of the X-Men. For Cyclops, he sketched the anatomy of his eyes, theorizing about the nature of the extra-dimensional portal that fueled his optic blasts. Not heat, but pure concussive force. A constant, unstoppable stream. The visor isn't a trigger, it's a regulator. A failsafe. His entire body must be conditioned to absorb the recoil, however minor. How? For Storm, he mapped out weather patterns, trying to comprehend the sheer scale of her abilities. Is it manipulation of atmospheric energy? Quantum weather control. Does she create the phenomena, or merely guide existing systems? The energy required to manifest lightning would be immense. Her body must act as a living conduit. How does she ground that much power without frying herself? He filled pages with frantic, brilliant analysis. And then, he turned to a blank page and wrote his own name at the top, Izuku Midoriya. Quirk 1F, he stopped, scratching out the word from his old life. He wrote again. X gene ability, kinetic stockpile, provisional. He drew a diagram of his own body, a simple stick figure. He drew arrows showing the uncontrollable flood of energy surging down one limb. He wrote the results in the margins: broken bones, dislocated joints, massive cellular degradation. He underlined the problem: vessel cannot withstand the output. He wrote down 2 possible solutions. 1. Reduce the output. 2. Strengthen the vessel. The first option seemed impossible. He had tried, and failed, every single time. The power was all or nothing, an explosive release he couldn't throttle. That left the second option. He needed to get stronger. But how could he build a body capable of containing a hurricane? Simple weight training wouldn't be enough. He needed something more. He was so lost in his thoughts, scribbling furiously, that he didn't hear the footsteps until a shadow fell over his desk. "What you writin', kid?" Izuku jumped, nearly knocking over his ink bottle. Logan was standing in his doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. He was in civilian clothes, a plaid flannel shirt and worn jeans, and he held a steaming mug in his hand. "And nothing. Just homework," Izuku stammered, instinctively trying to hide the notebook. Logan's eyes, sharp and predatory, flicked down at the drawings. He grunted, a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Homework, huh? Figured you for a scribbler." He walked into the room, uninvited, and peered over Izuku's shoulder. "Cyclops' optic blasts. Storm's weather manipulation. Smart. You're trying to understand the how of it." His gaze settled on the page with Izuku's own name. "Strengthen the vessel," he read aloud. "That's the first smart thing I've seen you do since you got here." Izuku stared at him, confused. He had expected more scorn, more dismissal. "Your problem ain't in that arm, bub," Logan said, tapping his own temple with a calloused finger. "It's up here. You think of your power like a bomb. You pull the pin, you throw it, and you hope you don't get hit by the shrapnel. But you're not just throwing the bomb. You are the bomb." He took a sip from his mug. It smelled like strong coffee. "You've been going about it all wrong. You're in the danger room trying to learn how to aim a cannon, but you're still standing in a canoe. Stop thinking about the cannon. We need to build you a better boat." Logan jerked his head towards the door. "Come on. You're done sitting in here feeling sorry for yourself. Grab your workout gear. We're going to the gym." The Institute's gym was just as impressive as the rest of the facility. It had everything from standard weight machines to advanced zero-gravity training spheres. But Logan ignored all of it. He led Izuku to a large, empty, matted area in the center of the room. "All right, kid? The 2 of us. Hand to hand," Logan said, stretching his thick neck. "No powers. No claws. Just you and me." Izuku paled. "Spar with you?" "That's what I said," Logan grunted. "Don't worry, I won't pop the claws unless you really tick me off. Now show me what you got." Try and land a single punch. What followed was the most humiliating 15 minutes of Izuku's life. He was faster than he looked and surprisingly agile, but Logan was a force of nature. He moved with a brutal, compact grace that defied his stocky build. Every punch Izuku threw was effortlessly deflected. Every kick was blocked. He was a gnat buzzing around a bear. Logan didn't even seem to be trying. He'd sidestep, parry, and occasionally shove Izuku, sending him stumbling back onto the mat. Finally, winded and frustrated, Izuku lunged in a wild, desperate rush. Logan moved in a blur, sweeping Izuku's legs out from under him and planting a heavy boot squarely in the center of his chest, pinning him to the floor. "Pathetic," Logan growled, though there was a teacher's frustration in his voice, not a bully's cruelty. "You're all arms and legs. You got no center. No foundation. Your power comes from your core, but you're fighting like a sapling in a hurricane." He removed his boot and offered Izuku a hand up. "Your problem is you're trying to use one part of your body. An arm. A leg. That power of yours, it's gotta be in all of you at once. It has to flow. To do that, you need to learn to use your whole body as a single unit. Every muscle, every tendon, working together." For the next hour, Logan didn't teach Izuku how to fight. He taught him how to stand. How to breathe. He drilled him on stances, on weight distribution, on shifting his center of gravity. It was grueling, monotonous work. Your body is a system, kid, Logan explained, correcting Izuku's posture with a rough shove. When you throw a punch, the power doesn't come from your arm. It comes from the ground up, through your legs, up your hips, through your core, into your shoulder, and then out your fist. You're trying to bypass the whole system and just detonate the warhead. Your body is the only thing that'll keep that power from turning you into mist. Start treating it with some respect. By the end of the session, Izuku was drenched in sweat, his muscles screaming in protest. He hadn't landed a single blow, but he felt different. More solid. More aware of his own body. Logan's lesson was brutal, but it was clear. Strength wasn't just about power. It was about the structure that contained it. Later that evening, Izuku was trying to meditate in the mansion's quiet garden, attempting to find the center Logan had been talking about, when another of his teachers found him. It's not an easy thing to find, is it? Izuku opened his eyes. Jean Grey was standing a few feet away, her red hair like fire in the setting sun. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, and her smile was warm and reassuring. Logan's lessons are important, she said, sitting on the grass near him. The physical foundation is essential. But there's a mental component, too. May I? She gestured towards his head, a silent request. Izuku, remembering her kindness, nodded. Yes. Please, close your eyes, she said softly. He felt a gentle, weightless presence enter his mind. It wasn't an invasion, it was a connection. Suddenly, he wasn't just seeing with his eyes, but with his mind's eye, and Jean was there with him. Show me your power, her mental voice whispered. Show me how you see it. In his mind, Izuku conjured the image he always held, a massive, concrete dam, straining against an impossibly vast reservoir of green energy. Cracks were spiderwebbing across its surface, and when he used his power, he saw himself taking a sledgehammer and smashing a hole in it. The resulting flood was violent, uncontrollable, and destructive. I see, Jean's voice was filled with understanding. You see it as something to be contained. A catastrophe waiting to happen. An explosion. So every time you access it, you are bracing for an explosion. You are telling your body that this force is an enemy, an invader. The image of the dam faded. Now, she said, let me show you how I see it. A new image formed in their shared mental space. It was a diagram of the human body, glowing with a soft inner light. But instead of a single, raging reservoir, the power was a network of 1,000 tiny rivers, flowing through every vein, every muscle, every cell. It wasn't a contained explosion. It was a circulatory system of pure energy. It is not a bomb to be detonated in one place, Jean explained, her voice guiding his perception. It is a current, meant to flow through the entire circuit. When you tried to channel it all through your arm, you were trying to force the entire ocean through a garden hose. Of course the hose burst. She guided his mental focus. Feel it now. Don't try to release it. Just let it circulate. A tiny bit. Let it flow from your heart, down your legs, up your spine, through your arms, and back again. It is a part of you, Izuku. It is not your enemy. Let it become your blood. Your breath. Izuku focused, guided by her telepathic hand. He reached for that sun of power, but instead of grabbing a chunk of it, he pictured opening a small valve, letting a single, warm stream flow into the network Jean had shown him. He felt a warmth spread through his entire body. It started in his chest, a pleasant, tingling heat that flowed down his limbs to the tips of his fingers and toes. It wasn't painful. It wasn't violent. It was energizing. Alive. He opened his real eyes. Jean was smiling, a bead of sweat on her brow from the telepathic effort. Izuku looked down at his own hands. Faint, flickering lines of emerald energy, like lightning trapped under his skin, were tracing paths along his arms. A soft, green aura, no brighter than a firefly's glow, enveloped his entire body. He felt powerful. But it was a calm, steady power, not the explosive fury he was used to. He felt strong, fast, and completely whole. No pain. No breaking. The realization hit him with the force of a thunderclap. This was it. This was the answer. The next day, Izuku stood before the doors to the danger room once more. This time, he wasn't filled with dread. He was nervous, but it was the nervousness of a student before a final exam, not a victim before his executioner. He walked to the center of the gray room, the familiar hiss of the doors sealing him in. Scott, Jean, and Logan were in the booth, their presence a familiar pressure. The objective is the same as your first day, Midoriya. Scott's voice came over the intercom, professional as ever. A single, stationary target. Minimal force. A drone materialized in front of him. But Izuku wasn't looking at it. He was looking inward. He closed his eyes. Foundation, he thought, planting his feet in the stance Logan had taught him, feeling his connection to the solid floor. Center. Circuit, not a bomb, he thought, remembering Jean's mental landscape. A current. Let it flow. He took a deep breath and reached for his power. He didn't pull, he opened. He allowed a tiny fraction, 1%, to seep out from his core and enter the network of his body. The warmth spread through him, familiar and welcome. The green, lightning-like lines traced across his skin, brighter this time, more defined. A faint, emerald aura flared to life around him, crackling with contained energy. He felt his muscles tense, not with strain, but with readiness. He felt faster, stronger, more alive than he had ever felt in his life. He felt whole. A full-body cowl of power, he thought, a name for the sensation popping into his head, unbidden. Full cowling. Danger room, launch projectile, Scott commanded, his voice betraying a hint of curiosity. A panel in the wall slid open and a solid steel sphere, the size of a baseball, was fired at him at over 100 miles per hour. Before, he would have tried to punch it. He would have broken his arm. Now, he didn't need to. He moved. Pushing off the balls of his feet, his entire body enhanced by the circulating energy, he dodged to the side with a speed that felt inhuman. The sphere zipped past where his head had been a fraction of a second before, slamming into the far wall with a deafening clang. He was barely breathing hard. He hadn't just dodged it, he had danced around it. In the observation booth, Logan's lips curled into a rare, thin smile. Jean was beaming, her eyes shining with pride. Scott's jaw was set, but he leaned forward, his full attention on the boy in the room. New target, Scott ordered. A humanoid training dummy, built of reinforced titanium, rose from the floor. Strike. Izuku turned to face the dummy. He took his stance. He channeled the energy of full cowling, ensuring it flowed through every part of him. He threw a punch. It wasn't a smash. It was a simple, clean right cross, all of his newfound technique behind it, the power coming from the floor, through his legs, his hips, his core, and into his fist. The 1% of his power acted as an amplifier, turning the controlled motion into a potent strike. His fist connected with the dummy's chest. There was no shockwave, no explosion of air. Just a solid, resonant thump of impact. A perfect, fist-shaped dent appeared in the titanium plate. Izuku retracted his hand, staring at it in disbelief. There was no pain. No strain. No snapping bones. Just the slight, satisfying sting of a perfectly landed punch. He looked at his hand, then at the dented dummy, then up towards the observation window. He couldn't see their faces, but he could feel their astonishment. A wide, trembling, triumphant smile spread across his face. The blues were over. He was still a glass cannon, but now, he finally knew how to build a better boat. The weeks following Izuku's breakthrough in the danger room settled into a new, demanding rhythm. The crushing cycle of failure and pain was replaced by the grueling, satisfying ache of progress. His life became a structured routine of academics, intense physical conditioning with Logan, and meticulously controlled power application sessions under the watchful eyes of Scott and Jean. He was no longer the boy who broke himself. He was the boy learning to bend without breaking. His mastery of full cowling was growing daily. He could now sustain a stable 1% output for over an hour, the emerald energy a constant, low-level hum under his skin, enhancing his speed, strength, and reflexes to peak human levels. He could handle short, controlled bursts of 2, even 3%, enough to put a serious dent in the danger room's titanium plating without so much as a hairline fracture. The change was most apparent in his sparring sessions with Logan. He still couldn't land a clean hit on the feral X-Man, but he was no longer a flailing amateur. He was learning to anticipate, to use his enhanced speed to create openings, to absorb Logan's brutally efficient lessons in body mechanics and combat awareness. "You're thinking too much, kid," Logan would grunt after effortlessly sidestepping a lightning-fast kick. "Stop trying to predict my next 10 moves and just react to the one that's about to take your head off. Get out of your damn notebook and get into the fight." Despite the gruffness, there was a new undercurrent of respect in Logan's tone. Izuku was no longer just a liability, he was a project. A promising one. His relationship with Scott remained professional and distant, but the open skepticism had been replaced by a cautious, pragmatic observation. Scott would drill him relentlessly in the danger room, running tactical simulations that tested not his power, but his decision-making. He would force Izuku to choose between two failing objectives, to perform triage on a simulated battlefield, to follow complex orders without question. "Power is a tool, Midoriya," Scott explained during one debriefing, his visor reflecting the holographic replay of Izuku's less-than-perfect performance. "But the hand that wields it is judgment. We're here to sharpen both." Jean remained his staunchest ally, a source of unwavering encouragement. She would often find him in the library late at night, surrounded by books on physics, anatomy, and engineering, his new notebook filled with complex equations and diagrams. He was trying to intellectually reverse-engineer his own power, to understand the physics of the recoil, the biology of his own limitations. "You have the most analytical mind of anyone I've ever met, Izuku," she told him one evening, placing a mug of herbal tea on his desk. "But don't forget that your greatest strength isn't in your head or your fists. It's in your heart. All this," she gestured to his meticulous notes, "is just you building a better way to let that heart do its work." He was growing. He was learning. He was becoming stronger, smarter, and more confident than he had ever been. But he was still a trainee. While the X-Men deployed on missions to handle mutant-related incidents across the country, Izuku's battlefield was confined to the simulated world of the danger room and the hushed halls of the mansion. His new role, assigned by Professor Xavier, was monitor duty. The heart of the Xavier Institute, its true nerve center, was not the professor's study or the danger room, but the command center. Located in the deepest sublevel of the mansion, it was a vast, circular chamber that hummed with the quiet, immense power of cutting-edge technology. The main wall was a colossal, wraparound screen, a mosaic of dozens of smaller displays. At any given moment, it showed global weather patterns monitored by storm, satellite imagery, encrypted news feeds from around the world, and the constant, steady pulse of Cerebro's passive detection grid. In the center of the room was a large holographic display table, capable of projecting 3D maps of cities or detailed schematics of enemy hardware. Ringing it were several workstations, each one a hub of information and communication. This was the wire of the X-Men, the place where the whispers of a world growing ever more hostile towards mutants were gathered, analyzed, and acted upon. And for 4 hours every day, Izuku sat at one of those stations, a headset over his ears, his eyes scanning the endless streams of data. His job was to listen to police scanners, to monitor online forums known for anti-mutant rhetoric, to flag news reports of potential hate crimes. He was a sentinel, but one armed with a keyboard instead of a fist. It was here, in the cool, blue-lit hum of the command center, that Izuku's hero complex, the driving, desperate core of his personality, began to flare into a painful, frustrating blaze. He was a spectator to the war he had been recruited to fight. He listened to a panicked 911 call from a woman in Ohio whose son had just manifested a minor telekinetic ability, lifting his toys into the air. The dispatcher, following a new protocol, had coldly transferred her to the Mutant Response Division. Izuku could only listen, clenching his fists, as the mother's pleas for help were met with bureaucratic indifference. He watched a news report from a local station in Arizona. A shop owned by a mutant family, a woman who could make flowers bloom out of season, had been vandalized. The words Gene Trader were spray-painted across her beautiful floral displays. The police had no suspects. The whispers were growing louder, more organized. And at the center of the hateful symphony were two names, Graydon Creed and Bolivar Trask. Graydon Creed was the telegenic, charismatic founder of the Friends of Humanity. He was a man with no discernible mutant abilities, a baseline human who had weaponized fear with surgical precision. His face was a constant presence on the news feeds Izuku monitored. He wasn't a ranting lunatic. He was worse. He was calm, well-dressed, and articulate. He spoke of genetic integrity, of protecting the sanctity of the human family. He wrapped his hatred in the flag and sold it as patriotism. Izuku brought up a recording of Creed's latest rally, held on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. The crowd was huge, a sea of angry, frightened faces holding signs that read humanity first and no more muties. They call us a hate group, Creed said, his voice resonating with a manufactured sincerity that made Izuku's skin crawl. But we are not a hate group. We are a love group. We love our children. We love our families. We love our species. And we will not stand idly by while our way of life is threatened by a genetic plague that twists and corrupts what it means to be human. He pointed a finger at the camera, his eyes burning with conviction. They tell you to accept them. They tell you to welcome them into your schools, into your neighborhoods. But what happens when the boy next door can level a city block with a temper tantrum? What happens when your daughter's classmate can read her every private thought? This is not the next step in evolution. It is a cancer, and the Friends of Humanity is the cure. The crowd roared its approval. Izuku muted the feed, his stomach churning. Creed's words were a poison, seeping into the public consciousness, turning fear into a righteous crusade. The reports he logged proved it. A rise in harassment complaints. Mutants being denied housing. Children with visible mutations being bullied and assaulted in schools. The Friends of Humanity gave people permission to hate, and they were accepting it with open arms. The other name, Bolivar Trask, represented the other side of the coin. Where Creed was the fire and brimstone preacher of the streets, Trask was the cool, calculating voice of industry. He was the CEO of Trask Industries, a leading name in advanced robotics and military hardware. His solution to the mutant problem was not rallies and rhetoric, but steel and plasma. The Sentinel program. Izuku pulled up Trask's recent interview on a major news network. He was a sharp, impeccably dressed man with an engineer's precise way of speaking in cold, intelligent eyes. Mr. Trask, the interviewer said, your critics say the Sentinel program is a draconian, aggressive measure. That these machines are weapons of war being proposed for domestic use. Trask offered a thin, practiced smile. My critics are operating under an outdated paradigm. They see a young girl who can create light, or a boy who can talk to squirrels. They do not see the Omega-level threat who can cause an earthquake, or the telepath who can rewrite the mind of a political leader. The mutant power spectrum is terrifyingly vast. Humanity, for the first time in its history, is facing a threat against which it has no natural defense. He gestured to a screen behind him, which showed shaky cell phone footage of a mutant with pyrokinetic abilities losing control and setting a building ablaze. It was an incident the X-Men had responded to weeks ago. Look at the chaos caused by the Friends of Humanity, the interviewer countered. Aren't you just profiting from the very fear that men like Graydon Creed are stoking? Fear is a rational response to a genuine threat, Trask replied smoothly, without missing a beat. Mr. Creed's methods may be unrefined, but the anxiety he taps into is very real. I am not a politician or a sociologist. I am an engineer. I offer a practical solution to a clear and present danger. The Sentinels are not instruments of hate. They are guardians. They are the ultimate deterrent, designed to neutralize mutant threats with maximum efficiency and minimal collateral damage. They are the shield that will allow humanity to sleep safely at night. Izuku felt a cold chill run down his spine. The symbiosis was terrifyingly perfect. Creed created the problem, the street-level terror that made headlines. Trask then sold the solution, positioning himself as humanity's savior. They were two heads of the same monstrous hydra, and with every passing day, they grew stronger. He began a new section in his notebook, dedicating it entirely to the twin threats. He mapped out the known chapter locations of the Friends of Humanity. He analyzed their recruitment methods, their use of social media to spread disinformation. He dug into Trask Industries, charting their government contracts, their stock performance, their key personnel. He was trying to find a weak point, a seam in their armor. He felt like he was staring at a chessboard, seeing all the pieces and all the threats, but his own hands were tied. His frustration began to bleed into his training. He pushed himself harder, channeling more of his power, trying to perfect his control over 5% bursts. He needed to be stronger, faster. He needed to be ready. "You're distracted," Scott said one afternoon, ending a danger room session early. Izuku had been sloppy, mistiming a dodge and taking a plasma bolt to the leg because his mind had been on a report he'd read about an FA mob cornering a mutant family in their home. "I'm fine," Izuku insisted, rubbing the stinging spot on his thigh. "No, you're not," Scott countered, his arms crossed as he leaned against the control console. "You're on edge. I know what monitor duty feels like. It feels like you're watching the world burn through a keyhole. You feel helpless." Izuku looked away, unable to deny it. There was a family in San Diego. The father can psionically reinforce glass. The Friends of Humanity found out. They surrounded his house for 2 days, throwing rocks, screaming threats. The local police just watched. We didn't have a team close enough to intervene before they were forced to leave their home. "I read the report," Scott said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "It's ugly. But that's the job. We can't be everywhere. We can't save everyone. Trying to carry the weight of every injustice will crush you. Then what's the point?" Izuku burst out, his frustration finally spilling over. "What's the point of all this power, of all this training, if I'm just sitting at a desk listening to people suffer? I can help. I'm not the kid who breaks his own arm anymore. I'm ready." Being able to throw a punch without shattering your own skeleton is not the same as being ready, Midoriya, Scott said, his tone hardening again. "Readiness is about more than control over your power. It's about control over yourself. In the field, there's chaos. There's fear. There are civilians screaming. There are cameras in your face. There are people who will look at you, even when you're saving them, and call you a monster. You haven't been tested against any of that. Data and simulations are not the same as experience." Scott's words were a cold dose of reality, and they did little to quell the fire in Izuku's gut. He knew Scott was right logically, but his heart, the hero's heart that Jean saw in him, screamed that he was wrong. The alert came on a Tuesday afternoon. The command center was quiet, with only Izuku and Forge on duty. Forge, a mutant with an intuitive genius for invention, was muttering to himself as he rewired a communications panel, a half-dozen robotic micro-tools buzzing around his hands like metallic insects. Izuku was monitoring the northeastern sector, listening to the banal chatter of police and emergency services. Then, a new signal cut through the noise. It wasn't a police broadcast. It was a panicked, encrypted burst on a known mutant distress frequency. A signal designed to bypass official channels and reach out to anyone who might be listening. The Institute's systems flagged it instantly. "Forge!" Izuku called out, his voice sharp with adrenaline. "I've got something." A distress call. Salem Center. The town park. Forge was at his side in a second, his hands flying across the keyboard, bypassing firewalls and triangulating the signal's origin. "Got it. It's coming from a burner phone. Audio only." He patched the audio through to the main speakers. The voice that filled the room was young, terrified, and breathless. "Cornered us near the old pavilion. There are maybe 20 of them. They have bats, pipes. Oh God, I think one of them has a gun. There are 4 of us. My sister, she can't control it when she's scared. The flowers are starting to bloom all over the grass. It's giving us away." The voice was cut off by a new sound, the roar of an angry crowd. "Jean freaks. Get out of our town." On the main screen, Forge pulled up a live feed from a traffic camera overlooking the park. The image was grainy, but the scene was horrifyingly clear. A small group of teenagers were huddled together at the base of a large stone monument. Surrounding them was a mob of adults, their faces twisted with hate. They were wearing jackets and hats with the simple, stark logo of the Friends of Humanity. They were armed, and they were closing in. "That's less than 10 miles from here," Izuku said, his heart pounding. "I'm sounding the general alert," Forge said, his fingers a blur. The mansion came to life. A low, insistent alarm began to chime through the intercom system, not the loud, blaring siren for an imminent attack, but the urgent, rising tone that signified a rapid deployment. X-Men, to the Blackbird. Immediate departure, Professor Xavier's voice announced, calm but firm, resonating through the entire facility. Hostile civilian encounter, Salem Center Park. Level 3 threat. Izuku was already on his feet, his mind racing. They're kids. They're outnumbered. They're trapped. The hero inside him was screaming, a primal, undeniable urge to move, to act, to save. He didn't even realize he was running until he reached the corridor that led to the hangar. He could see the team ahead of him, already in uniform. Storm was pulling on her gloves, her expression grim. Colossus was jogging alongside her, his skin already shifting to its organic steel form. Cyclops and Jean were striding ahead, deep in a low, urgent conversation. Izuku's new uniform, a reinforced dark green and black suit designed by Forge to withstand the stresses of full cowling, was waiting in his ready room. He could be suited up and on the jet in less than 2 minutes. He could help. He could create a diversion, he could get the kids out, he could. Izuku. Professor Xavier's voice stopped him dead in his tracks. He turned. The professor was waiting for him at the entrance to the command center, his expression unreadable. I have to go, Professor, Izuku said, his voice pleading, desperate. I can help. I can make a difference. The mob is armed. You might need the backup. Your place is here, Xavier said, his voice gentle but absolute. You will remain on monitor duty with Forge and provide communications support for the team. The words felt like a physical blow. But why? Izuku stammered. I'm ready. Scott said I need experience. This is it. It's a perfect first mission. A rescue, not a battle. It is precisely because it is not a battle that you must stay, Xavier explained, his eyes filled with a deep, weary wisdom. Out there, Izuku, it is not as simple as disabling a drone. That is a mob of frightened, angry human beings. One mistake, one miscalculation of your power, one action that is perceived as overly aggressive, and you could turn a tense situation into a riot. You could get people hurt. The very children you are trying to save could be caught in the crossfire. He glided his wheelchair closer, his gaze softening. I have no doubt about your power, Izuku. Or your heart. But Scott was right. Your control over your power is still new. You have not yet learned to master the incredible pressure of a live-field situation. You are not ready for this. Each word was a nail in the coffin of his hopes. He looked past the professor, down the hall towards the hangar. He could hear the whine of the Blackbird's engines starting up. They were leaving. They were going to fight, to save those kids, and he was being left behind. Please, Professor, he whispered, the word tasting like defeat. My decision is final, Xavier said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Go back to the command center. You have a job to do. The team is counting on you to be their eyes and ears. Do not let them down. With that, he turned and glided away, leaving Izuku standing alone in the hallway. The roar of the Blackbird's vertical thrusters echoed through the mansion as it lifted off, the sound a physical manifestation of his own crushing helplessness. He walked back to the command center, his shoulders slumped, the fire in his gut reduced to a cold, bitter ash. He sat down at his station, putting the headset back on. On the main screen, Forge had patched into the Blackbird's forward camera. Izuku could see the ground rushing by as his new family, his team, flew into danger. He watched the live feed from the park. The mob was getting closer to the terrified children. He could see their faces now, so young, so utterly terrified. He was the strongest one here. He had a power that could, in theory, shatter mountains. And all he could do was sit, and watch, and whisper into a wire.